Hello and welcome to the CX Files for Thursday, 6th of July, 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo.
And I'm Peter Ryan in Montreal. Mark, great to see you. And I'm really excited about the guests that we've got on this week. It's the second interview in the last few months we've done with an individual who is based down under.
So Audrey's effectively an industry analyst. She's writing research about what's going on in the industry and focuses especially on CX and BPO. She's based down in Sydney in Australia. Although I think now she's kind of like moving around the region, Singapore and Malaysia quite often as well. So, every time I talk to her, she's kind of in a different country. So although her home base is Sydney, and that's where I talked to her recently. The focus of the conversation I had with Audrey was on listening to customers. How can companies listen to their customers more effectively, actually create insight from what they're hearing, and then use the data that they're collecting more effectively? Because obviously every interaction with a company is creating a cloud of noise. That there's browsing history, there's purchase history, there's just stuff that you've looked at and rejected, and how do we actually sort of generate any insights from all of this?
I think Audrey brings a lot of very important points to the table, Mark. Look, at the end of the day, if we take a look, it doesn't matter the country, but consumer indexes when it comes to customer service are really plumbing the depths right now. And I think what it comes down to is the fact that individual customers feel that not only are they not being served, but companies don't care about what their thoughts are. Companies aren't listening to them. I know that in many cases, organizations, captive CX departments will say, well, we don't have the resources or we don't have the individuals to actually manage this. Well, they've got to find a way of getting the resources, and they've got to find a way of staffing the different roles that will be able to take into account all these different factors that effectively provide an element of stickiness between the company from which somebody's buying a product or a service and the actual customer. Right now, it doesn't look like there's really any end in sight to this anger that consumers have with the different companies. And I remember recently I was at a presentation and I was saying the difference between a consumer today versus say 10 years ago is 10 years ago, somebody would be patient, somebody would be understanding, somebody would be willing to give an organization or an employee on the front end of an organization the benefit of the doubt. Now, everybody wants everything immediately. If they don't get it immediately, they take to social media and complain. They're much less patient on a face-to-face basis, and they're more likely to get angry at a frontline employee. And unless enterprises are willing to find a way to really invest in the staffing, in the resourcing that's required to make sure that individuals are seen to be listening, or they're perceived to be listening by the customers, I think that this is just going to be something that's going to become endemic, and it's just going to become a spiral and get worse. And this is why I think it's so important that we have Audrey on the pod this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And listening to customers, it's often sort of thought of as synonymous with NPS. And that's, I've always found that interesting because, whenever I'm asked by a company to fill in a survey, I will only ever bother if I absolutely hated the service and I just want to give them a 0 or a 1, or I absolutely loved it. So I want to tell them this was fantastic, 10 out of 10. If it's adequate and you're just comfortable or happy or satisfied, then why are you going to spend time filling in a survey? So there's really a question here about how do you really listen and move beyond these kind of 1 to 10 surveys.
Well, let's find out what Audrey had to say as we move straight to the interview.
Okay, Audrey, we're talking about like listening and creating insight from being able to listen to customers and the data that they're creating. So why don't we start with the data itself? I mean, do you think companies are actually capturing the right kind of data that they need to get this kind of insight into what their customers need?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. And it's great to be back again on CX Files. So yeah, it's a really hot topic when you talk about data. So I think if you look at the data companies are collecting today, it is a lot of data. And it's also likely that the data is sitting in multiple repositories. And these repositories, Mark, they range from voice of customer programs, marketing automation systems, your CRM data, data from contact center applications, virtual assistants, and many more. And I was speaking to a very well-known bank recently in the Asia Pacific region, and they said to me that they have data sitting in something like 20 repositories. So the question then becomes, what do we do with all these data? How can we make better sense of the data? So, inculcating a data-driven culture in CX, is absolutely critical because you have to have a strategy around making sense of this data because there's just so much. So building a strategy around it is important. And of course, it all has to be done with a vendor that can help look at all aspects of security, for example. And how does an enterprise get to the level of having a vision around unified data so that marketing, sales, the contact center, the customer service teams, and all the other teams that are dealing with the same customer also now fully understand customer journeys better, their likes and dislikes, what makes them come back to a brand. So I think it's really about looking at it holistically and as an enterprise. So all of this data now has to be ingested. If I can say it that way, the data across these repositories has to be ingested into an intelligent data. And this is how some of the more advanced enterprises are doing it. And from that hub, the data will be cleansed and aggregated, and it will become actionable enough so that the sales teams or marketing teams or contact center agents can actually use the data. Now, it sounds like a massive exercise, and it is, but I'm starting to get more encouraged, Mark, by the chief customer experience officers that I'm meeting today. I'm impressed with, for example, I'll talk about a government agency in Singapore and the chief customer experience officer there. I mean, a wonderful person. And she said to me it was nearly impossible to drive a data-driven culture across the organization for holistic CX. It was nearly impossible to get everyone's time and buy-in, especially from all the other departments. So she embarked on a journey where she and her team deployed speech analytics, AI. They invested in an intelligent data hub. And what she found was when she started showing that data and the outcomes of the data to the marketing team or to the product team, that's when they were just blown away by some of the insights that were coming in. For example, the website for the agency was poorly designed. So people were always picking up the phone and calling the contact center. Many people also complained that they just found the website unfriendly, so they abandoned it. And it was really frustrating them in terms of even finding the product and marketing information they needed. So, the marketing team took this so seriously, and today they're actually fully on board with this program. So I think, data is going to be very important. It's the crux of driving exceptional CX. But it's time for enterprises to look at it holistically.
And it's interesting because when we measure CX, we have all these KPIs in place, but they're all kind of focused around measuring the performance of calls. And so, do we actually, is there a need for new metrics or a better way to actually measure customer service that's actually going to focus on improving the customer experience?
No, that's a really good question. You take the AHT, the classic AHT, average handle time, for example, Mark, and that metric has been around for more than 20 years. And these traditional KPIs were created when the world of contact centers was voice-centric. And then we had email and then web chat, but it was really a voice-centric world. So it was very traditional, and in the early years, it made sense. But the world is very different today. It is a digital world. It's an asynchronous messaging, for example, is growing. And also brands want to drive personalization. So if you want to know, if you know that, for example, your agent is speaking to a customer for 45 minutes, let's say, for example, the call goes on for that long, but that customer is so happy, and you can gauge from sentiment analysis that the customer wants to know more about the, let's say, home loan offers, the fixed deposits, and they're asking for more information. And they also want to walk into the branch to meet a consultant. And so you penalize the agent for exceeding the AHT. But in actual fact, you should be rewarding that agent for the effort they've put in. So I think, and also the engagement, the level of engagement that has now led to an upsell or cross-sell opportunity. So absolutely, Mark, softer KPIs are needed. Softer KPIs which emphasize on the agent's soft skills, how they engage with the customer. In this example, did it lead to an opportunity that can be closed right away? And if the agent showed, empathy. So these are all important areas to look at. And ultimately, because, the industry is also seeing a lot of attrition. And when you can come up with softer metrics, your agents will also feel happier when they are rewarded in some of these areas. So the balance is important. But as an industry, we must move forward to having softer KPIs.
Yeah. And does that also create an opportunity then to use the data and the insights that we can find from the data to increase the personalization that we actually sort of deploy with the customers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at if you look at just data alone, and when the data is actionable, Mark, and the agent has all the information they need because it's been cleansed, it's been aggregated, so it's really suited for now what the agent is viewing, they will be confident enough to drive a proactive customer engagement. I recently ordered goods for my 3 little nieces from a French sports retailer, and when the delivery delivered it through DHL, only 80% of the goods were delivered. So I looked at the package to find a number to call the contact center, and there was no number. There was a WhatsApp number, so I gave it a go, and I had to give them my order number, and I had to give them my email address. And immediately when I clicked that, I was just impressed by how well AI responded. And AI knew everything about the order history and what had gone wrong. And immediately after, the human assisted service came in. So the agent took over on WhatsApp. And, I was so impressed by the data they had and the level of personalization they offered me because through the data and the integration that this French sports retailer had built through APIs, they had a very good link to logistics and delivery. So the agent went on to say to me, we're really sorry and blah, blah, blah. And, we really want to get the goods to you, but we can do that in the next hour, or we can do that after dinner, or we can get it to you at 8 p.m. tonight. And I was really blown away. And the reason, Mark, they could do that was because they had all the context and the data right in front of them. It was also happening on one channel, which was really impressive. It was synchronized, and they could really impress me by just having the data of the delivery and logistics schedule of DHL at their fingertips. So that's that itself is a good example of personalization.
Yeah. And I mean, if we're capturing this data from the customer on like their behavior and their intent, and we can sort of more effectively see how to personalize a service. I mean, that's great, and that helps the customer. But how does it sort of create more insight for the brands into what the customer actually wants in future then?
Yeah, so I think, this is where it comes down to you have the right data. I think enterprises must invest more in that unified data hub or intelligent data hub, because if not, the data is just going to continue sitting in multiple repositories. But this is where this whole notion around listening to what your customer is saying is going to be absolutely critical. Listening through speech analytics is going to be so critical, because when you can do that, and when you can marry that with some of the data you're seeing now from this intelligent data hub, you can almost, as a brand, predict what the customer is thinking, what their likes are, what their dislikes are. And so when marketing or sales or even the customer service team now engages with the customer, it's not going to be the same questions that they ask them or the same campaigns that they run. It's actually going to be more meaningful. And you can actually wow them and impress them in a more proactive way, because you have not only the data at your fingertips, you understand their journeys better, and you're really now truly understanding what they're really after in your brand. And even a simple thing like when a customer goes to your website for 5-6 times and they abandon your website or they abandon the shopping cart, there are many enterprises now that are taking action towards that, because you can actually put a virtual assistant there to help the agent or understand a bit more. Or a retailer in Melbourne was talking to me about how they improve that experience by bringing the customer to the store in the US or globally by having a video experience. So there are a lot of things you can do to accelerate that experience for the customer. And this is what brands are after.
Yeah. And we've seen, like in the last 6 months, we've seen the growth of tools like ChatGPT and generative AI. I mean, can brands start using these tools to create like bespoke answers to questions that the customer has?
Yeah, so this is a really hot topic, right? I mean, I get asked about this nearly every day, generative AI, and I think there's no question about it that what we're seeing and the innovation we're seeing with large language models is really mind blowing, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. But I think when you bring this context back now to customer experience, or conversational AI, or a multi-virtual agent strategy, or an agent assist solution. This is using ChatGPT or large language models in a context that is live. It's real time. And so it's not like using ChatGPT to write a resume or for a marketing type activity. So when it's live and when it's real time, it also means that what you design has to be really appropriate for the conversation, because once the virtual assistant goes live, that's it. And therefore, you have to start with pilots. And I think some of the enterprises I'm speaking to now, that's exactly what they're doing. They're really testing it incrementally, because they have to have guardrails to ensure that anything that's out there doesn't become inappropriate or intrusive or something that is out of context, because that can completely damage your brand. And I think that has become really important for enterprises I'm meeting today. So they're really starting with pilots. They know that there is a lot of potential here across all the areas I mentioned, but they are having guardrails in place, because you really have to.
Yeah, but that must be a problem for regulated industries then. I mean, I can imagine a bank that wants to improve their customer self-service, they might be looking at something like ChatGPT, but if you can't rely 100% on the validity of the answers, then I guess it's very difficult for those kind of industries to use this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where you have to go back to the classic of how you design these conversations, how you design it using the database that you want to, how you train the models. And I also think now some of the best conversational AI solutions out there that are really working. Mark, if you really look at them, they've gone through a lot of listening. You know, a lot of these companies have listened to customer conversations, sat in call centers for days, looked at interaction analytics, looked at journey analytics. And when you can listen to the conversations, train the models to get it to that level, and then design it, and this is where you need to work with linguists and also some really good, human design experts. You can start designing a human-like conversation. So I think for regulated industries or unregulated industries, I guess the innovation we're seeing is real. But I always like to caution that, pay attention to the conversational design element.
And I suppose
that's so critical to get it right.
Yeah, exactly. And what you're really saying is that the companies need to listen to the customers better. But if we
absolutely.
look at
especially before they start on the project, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and if we look at the tools that many companies are using to listen, they are kind of clunky surveys or metrics like NPS, and it just seems that the data is there, but the companies are just listening in such a very basic way. I mean, how do they improve this?
So this is one of my favorite topics, like NPS scores and CSAT scores, and just feedbacks and surveys. Because to me, all of this, and like you rightfully mentioned it, it stops after a certain while, and there's only so much you can get from the customer. I like to call it static listening. So you really don't know when the customer has said yes or no, or when the customer has ticked that box, if they're really feeling unhappy about your brand, or they're going to move to a competitor tomorrow, or they were just not impressed with the service, but they just wanted to end the call, so they just gave a rating. And I think this is where it's falling apart for a lot of organizations. They are relying on some of these traditional methods and then saying that our NPS grew by 80%, our NPS grew by 200%, but it's static listening. The real listening comes in when you see the power of sentiment analysis, when you see the power of speech analytics or call recordings, and really listening to how your customers really feeling, the emotional side of it, the behavioral side of it. That's where the real value comes in. And that's where the teams also can start taking action. And it also leads to very good training and coaching mechanisms, because you can train your agents, for example, to do better on this. And when you serve a customer and you really want to drive hyper-personalization, if you're going to rely on some of these more traditional methods of listening, then you're only going to get very far. So yeah, absolutely. I think companies need to listen better, but they need to move away from traditional clunky surveys and NPS scores, and relying on NPS scores and CSAT scores.
But I mean, how easy is this then, or how difficult maybe is a better way to put it? I mean, if I'm an organization that's been kind of relying on these, post-call 1 to 10 surveys, and how do I actually move forward from that then?
So I was speaking to actually a chief customer experience officer, and she brought in a head of contact center to the call, and they were saying that it's really difficult because they've been doing this for the last 15, 20 years. And sometimes the surveys themselves haven't changed, like even the surveys they send out on email, it's the same survey, it's the same questions that they've been asking. And the challenge with this survey is also what I understood from these discussions with these two leaders was it's always going to be used by one particular department. So they're seeing the benefits, they're seeing the data. The agent doesn't really have privy to that. So again, you're going back to that siloed mentality. And also this particular agent was saying that all the data that they get today from a CRM, for example, or the data that's in front of their screens from a lot of the context that's coming in, only gives them one part of the equation about the customer. And to really get to the level of truly understanding your customer behavior, the power of speech analytics is just going to change the way they upsell or cross-sell opportunities. So I asked them then, how easy was it for them to move to embark on this? And they said it was difficult. They still run surveys. They still use the traditional feedback forms, but they also now take speech analytics very seriously. So there was a time when surveys dominated for about 70% of what they were doing. Now they're trying to reverse that, where the more traditional surveys will be about 30%, but they really want to get more into speech analytics and AI. Because ultimately, when you can understand that customer behavior, even the marketing team can run more targeted marketing activity. They can't do that from a survey. A survey doesn't tell them enough, not even the NPS rating.
Yeah, and I suppose then, I mean, just to wrap up, is that the key then to listening more effectively, basically understanding the data that you've already got?
Oh, absolutely, Mark. I mean, I think I'm really impressed by the more enterprises and contact centers I engage with, and like my discussion with this chief customer experience officer at this government agency in Singapore, and how it took her a long time, but how she embarked on a whole strategy around having a unified data vision, investing in it, building a team of experts to look at data, but also changing the approach they use for listening. And she said it was difficult. It was really difficult to get away from traditional surveys, because that was easy. You click a button and it goes out. And she said the improvements they've seen after they deployed speech analytics has just been phenomenal, because when you start listening, you really know now how well you're doing. For example, some of your products, or some of the things that you've been running or services might be redundant in the future, or customers are really not actually appreciating some of the things. So you're really getting closer to making improvements. But when you marry all of this together and have that data vision to bring the data together, you're also going to be closer to driving hyper-personalization.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great point to end. Thank you very much, Audrey.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me on your show again.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.